An outlaw in the Wild West, Big Nose George liked to say he was tough as boots. What an irony then that in death some of his remains were made into a pair of shoes. Herewith, the story of a nasty crook who succumbed to frontier justice and ended up on a cobbler's last. Big Nose George Parrott was a member of a gang of thugs who plied their trade in Wyoming in the 1870s. George came by his nickname for the obvious reason that he had a very large schnozzle. He was thought to have been born in France, and it's not known how or why he turned up in the Wild West. He rode with a gang under the leadership of a man called Sim Wan. Their standard crimes were holding up stagecoaches and stealing horses. They became an irritant to the respectable, God-fearing citizens of the territory who hoped for statehood. If Washington was to grant such a government upgrade, ne'er-do-wells such as Sim Wan and Big Nose George had to be put out of business. Sim Wan and his fellow scoundrels got a bit above themselves. They decided to follow the lead of Frank and Jesse James and take up the train robbery trade. Taking pocket watches, cash, and jewelry off stagecoach passengers didn't satisfy the dreams of the ambitious gangsters. The big money was in robbing trains. Unlike the Hollywood depictions, train robbers did not ride alongside the train and leap onto it with guns drawn. They either boarded the train as regular passengers and then pulled off the robbery, or they derailed the locomotive and burst into the car carrying cash in the confusion that followed. Big Nose George and his pals decided on the latter strategy. The plan was to derail a Union Pacific train between Medicine Bow and Hanna, Wyoming. A train in mid-August 1878 was targeted because it was believed to carry the payroll of the company. They loosened some spikes and lay in wait for the steamer to chug into view and crash. But the plan was foiled when a section crew came along on a routine inspection, spotted the tampered track, and made repairs. It was quickly established that Sim Wan and his ruffians were responsible, and a posse of 2 was sent off to hunt them down. It seems like an inadequate force to take on a gang of about 8, and so it proved to be. Buckrail News reports that the gang, on the run, came to Rattlesnake Canyon, where they holed up to wait and ambush the posse. When Union Pacific Detective Henry Tip Vincent and Deputy Sheriff Robert Widowfield rode into the canyon, they were greeted by gunfire and died. The gang stripped the bodies of anything of value, dismembered them, and threw the remains into the brush. The members of the gang took off in different directions, with a reward of $1,000 on each of them. Over the next few months, gang members were tracked down. Some were shot in the commission of a crime, others were captured and hanged, and one got a life sentence. But Big Nose George Parrott eluded capture. Despite his prominent snout, Parrott was able to lie low, venturing into robbery only when he needed cash. But in addition to his big proboscis, he had a big mouth and was inclined to boast about his exploits wherever he could find an audience. In August 1880, he was holding forth in a saloon in Miles City, Montana. In so doing, he drew attention to himself such that somebody recognized him from a wanted poster. A sheriff was alerted, and he arrived at the saloon and arrested Parrott without incident. As he was being taken back to Wyoming to stand trial, the train he was on was stopped by vigilantes. The sheriff was overpowered, and Parrott taken from the train and hoisted up on a telegraph pole with a rope around his neck. After Big Nose George struggled to breathe for a while, the group lowered him and demanded a confession to the murders of Vincent and Widowfield. Parrott refused, so up he went a few more times until he was ready to promise to tell all at his trial. He kept his word and related his crimes in grisly detail. In December 1880, he was found guilty and sentenced to hang on April 2, 1881. However, the people of Rawlins, Wyoming, were an impatient lot, especially after Parrott beat up the sheriff in an escape attempt on March 20th. On the night of March 22nd, a crowd burst into the jail, and because the sheriff was in no mood to offer much in the way of resistance, they liberated Big Nose George from his cell. The vigilantes proved to have a poor understanding of execution by hanging, and were successful at killing the outlaw only after 2 failed attempts. 2 doctors, John Osborne and Thomas Maggie, took possession of the body. They wanted to examine Parrott's brain for evidence of an abnormality that might explain his criminal behavior. There was none. Lillian Heath, 15 was assisting the doctors, who gave her the top half of George Parrott's skull. Miss Heath went on to become Wyoming's first female doctor, and she used Big Nose George's cranium as an ashtray. Meanwhile, Osborne removed skin from the dead man's chest and thighs and sent it off to be tanned and made into a pair of shoes. Osborne became Wyoming's first Democratic governor and wore the Big Nose George footwear at his inaugural ball.